and welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. And last, but certainly not least, if you're interested in extra content on querying and publishing that's only for our members, please consider joining the Literary Prospects Patreon at patreon.com/literary prospects. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Daria Lavelle is an American fiction writer. Born in Kiev, Ukraine, and raised in the New York metro area, her work explores themes of identity and belonging through magic and the uncanny. Her debut novel, Aftertaste, is out now. Daria's short stories have appeared in The Deadlands, Dread Machine, and elsewhere, and she holds degrees in writing from Princeton University and Sarah Lawrence College. She lives in New Jersey with her husband, children, and golden doodle, all of whom love a great meal almost as much as she does. Daria Lavelle, thank you so much for being here today to discuss your delicious debut novel, Aftertaste. Author Laura Hankins says Aftertaste is a breathtaking novel, combining the grit of the restaurant world with the magic of the afterlife. Daria Lavelle perfectly blends unexpected ingredients into a book you'll want to savor. It's a story about grief that's filled with humor, warmth, and astounding creativity. Author Joan Silver says this is a terrific book. Aftertaste offers the glories of food and cooking, all the Yes Chef's details we now love, in a cool, brilliant, and suspenseful novel whose spec-fic plot wants to talk about the mysteries of sense memory and death. I could not put it down. And author Rachel Harrison says, a decadent debut that marks the arrival of a sparkling new voice, dark and delicious, sincerely moving, and at times laugh out loud funny, a heady, bittersweet, beautiful novel about life and death, grief and closure, passion and hunger. A must read. So, with that, how would you describe Aftertaste?
Oh, that's such a good question. I've been working on getting my arms around what this story means because I think there's so much to it. There's so many aspects to it. There are so many things that I put into it. So at the highest level, what is it actually about? So it is part ghost story, it is part love story, and it's all food story. It takes place in the New York City culinary scene, and it's about a man named Constantine who loses his dad at a really young age, and soon after begins to experience what he calls aftertastes. So he's able to feel, intuit, taste the flavors of ghosts' favorite meals or the most memorable, important meals. And he doesn't know when it's coming. He doesn't know what it's going to be. And it only lasts for a moment before the flavors of this meal is gone, before the flavors of meal are gone. But he knows that they're coming from a spirit. And that's kind of their way of connecting with him and letting him know that they're there. And so he's now an adult. He's in his 30s. He's working at a speakeasy as a bartender. He has this dead-end job that he doesn't love. He's kind of like a failure to launch situation in his life since the death of his father. And he experiences one of these aftertastes. And for the first time, he decides to act on it. And that kind of changes everything for him because in acting on it, he discovers that he can actually bring a spirit back from the afterlife to the living realm for one last meal with somebody they loved. And this sets him off on this journey through the New York culinary scene to open a restaurant serving closure. He doesn't expect that the journey into the kitchen is going to lead him to fall in love with someone who has her own mysterious connections to the afterlife. And he certainly doesn't expect that what he thinks is a good thing he's doing, granting people closure, is going to cause all sorts of havoc and consequences in the afterlife. So I would say it is a book that contains magic. It's a book that deals with grief and loss, but also in this very vibrant way. I would say it's full of life, full of fun, full of these really incredible foodie set pieces. So if you're a person who has watched Top Chef and loves cooking shows and loves The Bear, there is definitely something in here for you. If you're a person who loves New York City and that whole vibe of what that culture is like, it is very much based in that. In fact, a lot of the restaurants that I mentioned are either real places or thinly veiled renditions of real places. It is a great love story. It is a kind of adult coming of age story, and I think it has a little something for everyone.
It's such an original concept and premise. Um, this actually started for you, came to you as a one fully formed scene. Is that right?
hmm Yeah, so I'm a writer who tends to I just kind of get these ideas like and they come out as scenes in my mind so I can see it very, very visually. I know some writers don't do that, some writers do.
Mhm.
So I usually get this sort of breadcrumb, this kernel. And in this case, I was having a writing session and I was thinking about some random things and this entire scene of this chef in a Hell's Kitchen apartment. It's got this crumbling brick. It's this old apartment. He is cooking something. He's plating this beautiful dish of food. He's, wiping the side with a towel and he sets it on the table to eat. And this sparkling, glittering ghost comes through the brick wall to try to attempt to eat it. And like that was the whole scene. And I immediately latched onto it. It fascinated me. It
Mhm.
obsessed me for a long time. And I kept thinking about it and trying to understand who is this chef? Who is the ghost? What's the relationship between them?
Mhm.
What is special about his food that is bringing her back? Can he do this
Mhm.
with any spirit? Is there something particular about her, or is this something he might replicate? And what is the story? So I had all of these questions based on this little kernel, this nugget of a scene. And it took me years to kind of unpack and unravel what the story could be. I initially started writing it as a short story,
Mm.
and I wrote it as a scene, which winds up now like a rendition of that. The only remnant of this beginning scene is right in the middle of the book. It's when he not to give away spoilers, but he does live in a Hell's Kitchen apartment, and he does
Mhm.
do something in that apartment related to this gift. And those scenes are the only thing that call back to this. But it's something that it took me years to figure out. It's bigger than this because the short story kind of began and ended in that apartment, and there was just more. There was more to it. It couldn't be contained in a short form. So over many years, I followed many other breadcrumbs.
Uh, Food, obviously front and center in this novel. And you have said that, like Constantine, our protagonist, food's been the primary way for you to access your Ukrainian heritage.
Mhm.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So my family is Ukrainian. I was born in Kiev and we moved to the New York area when I was 2. And food was always the way that I connected with my Ukrainian culture, my Ukrainian heritage. So everything that my parents made my whole life growing up to this day was from scratch. It was like everything from, we'd pickle pickles to my mom would make farmer's cheese. Like it was very, very much like handmade, homemade food. And a lot of it came kind of fully enrobed in stories about our family and,
Mm.
who made this one dish, who made these pilmeni, which are this sort of dumpling that winds up appearing in the book. Whose borscht are we trying? Who originated this recipe for this particular kind of salad? So a lot of storytelling happened in my family, and a lot of cooking happened in my family. And I think food was a big way that we connected to one another, but also
Mhm.
again connected to Ukraine in a way where I couldn't be there, and I was so young when I left that there were so few things I could remember. I didn't have a visual for the streets that we lived on or the apartment that we had, but I could remember food, and it was something that brought the world of Ukraine with me throughout my entire life. At the same time, it was also this very kind of untethering, othering experience growing up in the
Mhm.
US and wanting so
Mhm.
badly, like so many immigrant kids, to assimilate and be American enough and be part of what the culture here was like. And so I would sit in the school cafeteria and I would have the experience of my peers around me, everybody had peanut butter and jelly, everybody, and I did not. And it was this constant feeling of like, oh, this feels like a dead giveaway that I'm not one of you because I'm eating a different food and I'm eating something different. And so I had all of these formative experiences, some good, some bad, around this cultural food. And I wanted to kind of give that to Constantine because I think growing up as an immigrant, food becomes again this touchstone for multiple things. And it's this proxy for how you have a foot in two different worlds. You know, you're American, you're Ukrainian, you feel like you're somewhere in between, you're straddling this line. And for Constantine, that manifests when he's a child in much the same way that I just described. But as an adult, you know, he's still straddling two worlds. It just happens to be the world of the living and the dead. So I wanted to kind of take that metaphor and give that to him as part of his makeup and as part of who his character was. So it was really important to kind of build him on the basis of all of that. And so many of the flavors that he talks about experiencing with his father and flavors from Ukraine that they sort of replicate and they bring with them throughout Kostya's life.
Mm.
So many of them are things that I grew up eating, and um, they're a very strong flavor profile for anybody Eastern European who is, you know, whether they're living in a diaspora or living in Eastern Europe somewhere, these are all really familiar flavors.
You say that you also grew up in a superstitious
Mhm.
family.
Very much so. My family had and continues to have a superstition for everything. For everything. Like if I forget my keys and I have to run back, I have to look in a mirror to make sure that a bad spirit has not followed me in. All sorts of
Wow.
things. All sorts of things. We can't gift knives. Like it's the list is very long, but I think part of that is what made me so attracted to just the idea of speculative fiction in general. I think I believe in these strange coincidences. I believe in the spirit world. I believe that, you know, once someone passes on, they're not gone from us forever.
Mm.
And when I was a kid, I was certainly drawn to lots of stories of afterlives and different interpretations of what the afterlife might look like. So I was obsessed with Greek mythology when I was little. I loved all of the tales of Hades and the underworld and Persephone and all of it was really, really interesting to me. And as I got older, you know, things like Dante's Inferno were really, really places that I focused. I studied literature in college, and that was definitely a kind of a focal point or a highlight whenever I came across something that offered a glimpse of the afterlife.
Mm.
And I think looking back, there was so much media that I consumed at these really formative moments in my life as a teenager. I was obsessed with the movie What Dreams May Come, which offers, again, a similar kind of look at what an afterlife could look like. And there were, you know, all of these different interpretations. I played video games about it. I was really, really interested in it. So perhaps it's no surprise that I loved the idea of looking at this through the lens of food, because
Mm.
combining those two passions, sort of the formative food memories that I had, and all of the ways that it tied me back to people that I either never met or had lost.
Mhm.
And then thinking about, you know, what does an afterlife centered around food look like? It kind of just made perfect sense in my mind. Those things connected, even though they seem like at first blush, it seems kind of like a weird combination, but I think it makes such good sense because food is so closely tied to memory. And what is a ghost if not a memory that lingers?
Mhm. What do you think it means to be haunted?
So I think haunting can happen in a lot of different ways for different people. And the characters in Aftertaste, their haunting largely manifests in this inability to move on, that
Mm.
they're so trapped by the loss that they feel that they can't
Mhm.
find joy, and they can't embrace life in the way that they're meant to, or the way that they want to.
Mhm.
And so it becomes this way of being held back from achieving just more life and more living for a lot of these characters. So Kostya, for example, he's completely stuck ever since he lost his father. He can't figure out who he is. He doesn't go after the things that he wants. he's in these jobs and these relationships that don't fulfill him, and he's kind of just like moving through life, and he needs a big thing to shake him out of it, and that big thing becomes this ability to bring spirits back, and that sets him off on this path towards his own kind of closure.
Mhm.
Mora, who's the female main character, she's also dealing with a loss in her life, and not to give any spoilers away, but she takes some very, very unhealthy measures to distract herself from this loss. And that's really all it is. It becomes this massive distraction, but it happens in such a way that it completely encompasses her life, and it prevents her from doing the things that are healthy for her. And so when these two characters find one another and they fall in love, they're able to kind of find closure together through this ability to connect with another person on this deeper level. And so I think going back to, what is it to be haunted? That's, I think, what it means for the living.
Mhm.
In the
Mhm.
story, I think if you're dead, if you're a spirit, you can be haunted in different ways. And the way that it manifests in the book is if your living aren't able to let you go enough to live their own lives and kind of move on. So what I just described these two
Mhm.
characters doing, that creates a drain on the spirits in the spirit world. And so they're haunted by kind of the weight of being this anchor and this tether for someone who's living who can't move on.
Mhm.
And so for them, that manifests in lots of different ways, but it begins with this hunger that just gets worse and worse and worse and becomes this massive, all-encompassing thing. Um, and a lot of that is based on research that I did and things that I found across different cultures where there's so many interpretations of what happens when we die, and there's so many more than I ever expected interpretations of how food and spirits kind of interact together. So in some
Mhm.
cultures, food is this really wonderful tether to somebody you've lost, and it's a way to bring them back. It's a way to revisit them. It's a way to encourage them to come back and revisit you. And in some cultures, it's the mythology around it is more centered around, oh, these spirits are dangerous or angry and they need to be fed to kind of be warded off. And so
Mhm.
I took pieces of all of those, but the hunger that arrives for my spirits and my spirit world come from some of these traditions where these spirits are insatiable, and part of their punishment in the afterlife is that they're forced to kind of hunger, and they can eat, but they don't ever get fulfilled. So that's kind of what some of the ghosts get cursed with.
You were about two-thirds of the way through writing this novel when Russia invaded Ukraine.
Mhm.
Is that right? How did that change the trajectory of the book, or did it?
It did. It had a big impact on it. I think at that point, I had already established that Kostya was kind of a proxy for me in my immigrant experience.
Mhm.
And I knew that I wanted to have a conversation in the book about that and about the context of that in terms of food.
Mhm.
But once the war began to happen and I saw our family and friends and how they processed it and how terrifying it was, um, my my initial reaction was I can't work on this novel right now. But then when I finally came back to it, my relationship with Kostya had changed, and I felt like he couldn't just be a proxy for me. I wanted him to embody some of the really inspiring, incredible things that I saw happening with Ukrainians on the ground during this war. And I continue to see this sort of indomitable spirit, this bravery, this desire to do whatever you can to help others, whether you know them well or not. This desire to put other people and their needs kind of ahead of yourself, which I saw happening over and over and over again.
Mhm.
And this ability to risk everything if you have to protect the people that you love. So I made a very conscious effort to put that into Kostya so that part of what I was seeing and part of what I was feeling could be manifested in him. And I will also say, without giving an enormous spoiler, the book takes place in 2017, which is before the war starts, before COVID. Um, and it was a really conscious choice. And the decision that Kostya makes at the end of the book of what to do with his gift is largely based on my knowledge of what is coming in the world.
Wow. Wow. It's a story about grief and longing, but it is also joyful.
Hmm.
And you've said that it was important to you for the novel to be laugh out loud funny at
Hmm.
times and entertaining and sexy. Um, why was that so important to you to include that joy in the story?
Yeah, when I set out to write this book, I knew that it was going to be about spirits and loss and death,
Mhm.
but I wanted it to be as much about life and the things that are worth living for and to feel vibrant. I didn't want it to feel like a one note thing. I wanted it to be like those great meals you have where there's a bit of every kind of flavor and the combination is kind of what makes it magical. And I tend to be a person who leans on humor. I tend to be a person who is positive and optimistic in life. And so I wanted to make sure to put that in through various characters, through various situations. And I also find that the food scene in general, and when I talk about food, when I think about food in restaurants, it's such an uplifting, exciting thing to me. I couldn't write it in a way that didn't represent that. I just don't think that would be truthful. And I think that there's this kind of magic that happens when you're in New York City and you're young and you're living there and you may not have the bigger responsibilities yet. Like my characters don't have children yet. They don't have animals or pets. They kind of are just taking care of themselves. And it's a very particular point in life where you can enjoy the things that are around to be enjoyed. You can kind of have those exciting moments and lean into them. And I wanted to make sure that I put the places that I loved that made me feel excited and joyful in New York City into this book as much as I could. So there are hidden speakeasies and there are warehouse parties and there are kind of inside looks at kitchens and hole in the walls and bodegas and arcades and just lots of vibrancy. Because I also think you have to juxtapose that with some of the heavier elements in the book. That was really important to me to make sure that it felt balanced.
Was it difficult to find that balance, to strike it? And even in the writing process, were you sort of going back and forth between some of the darker moments and the more joyful, or how did that work?
I knew that I wanted there to be kind of this thread of mystery throughout the whole book.
Mm.
And I knew as I was writing that I didn't want to put too many, dark or scary or sad, kind of longing
Mhm.
scenes
Mhm.
together in a string. I wanted to make sure they were balanced by lightness. And I will say, even in the more poignant moments, there's always like a wisecrack or a comedy or a line, because that's how I am. That's
Mhm.
how I think. And so I wanted to make sure to be authentic to that. When I structured the book, uh, so quickly backing up to kind of this kernel of this idea,
Mm.
when I had that idea, I only had these two characters, right? I had the chef and the ghost.
Mm.
And as I went through and started to think about this book, it took me years before I made any sort of conscious decision to write it as a novel because I was still waiting for what are these moments, what are these other things. And throughout life, I would get I would get like served these little hints of things. So I would be at a bar and I would look up and it was called the Library of Distilled Spirits. And I was like, wait, this is something. And then I would spend, 20 minutes anxiously typing into my phone and thinking about these scenes. And so as I started to collect these little pieces that I could use in this book that felt right for it, I had this experience of going on a food tour. We were in New Orleans and we were just exploring the city and we decided to take this bicycle food tour. And that experience came back as I was starting to conceptualize writing this as a novel. And all of a sudden, I was like, wait, what if there were a food tour? What if there were some interstitial chapters that happen between Kostya's main narrative and like this food tour? So, whatever is happening in Kostya's life, the food tour is going to be vibrant and fun and exciting, right? Because that's a tour guide, it's going to bring a different energy. So, I started with that concept. And then I got to a certain point in the narrative where I felt like I needed to break it into parts. I'm not going to
Mhm.
explain more than that because that would be a giant spoiler, but it needed to be broken into parts. So at that point, I started to think about how do I structure each part? And I didn't want to do something jarring where we go from having these alternating chapters to all of a sudden we're just in a standard narrative and it's just one kind. So I started to think about how I could replicate that alternating kind of interstitial chapter approach in each part and it wound up structuring the book kind of like a tiered cake. That's how I think of it in my mind. So every part is like its own tier.
Hmm.
And Kostya's main story is like the spongy part, the cake part, and then all of the interstitial chapters from these different narrators that are all first person are kind of like a different filling. So one layer's got, one character's filling, another layer's got a different character's filling, and when you eat them all together, that kind of creates the flavor of the book. So that was sort of how I came to it. But that was part of what I consciously did to try to balance that darkness and light as much as I could.
I love that. That's such a great way to describe it. And food
Thank you.
based.
Food-based. Apparently, I can only speak in food puns and food language now after living in this world for so long.
We talked a little bit earlier about your fascination with and love for reading speculative fiction. You have an MFA from Sarah Lawrence
Mhm.
where you focused on the writing of speculative fiction. Um, Obviously, most of your work also speculative, certainly this novel. I wondered, um, we've talked about what draws you to reading it. What particularly draws you, from an artistic point of view, to writing speculative fiction? What do you feel like it allows you to do, maybe that other genres may not?
That's such a good question. I've never thought about it. It comes so naturally to me. I think I can start, and I often do start in a very grounded place in the real world, in a place like New York City, in a
Mhm.
particular time. And what inevitably happens to me is I get bored with regular life in my characters' lives.
Mhm.
And so something amazing has to happen. That's just how my brain works. Like how do we go from being in this office building to all of a sudden it's covered in fairy lights? That's just these leaps that my mind makes because I think it's easier for me to see what the story is going to be if it takes place in a regular, incredibly familiar world. And
Mm.
and I think part of the joy that I find in writing is discovery. And I think just like what I enjoy reading, when something is unpredictable to me or feels like I'm reading something new and fresh for the first time, that's what's most exciting. And I think I feel that in writing too. Like it's that process of discovery and not knowing. And I think that's part of why I prefer to write largely without outlines, because I like to follow my characters and I like to kind of say yes to strange interactions with them. So
Mhm.
a lot of the surprises and the twists that happen in Aftertaste happened very naturally because my characters just went to those places. I didn't plan them. And I think if I had planned them, it wouldn't have been as impactful in the moments that those things happen. But I think thinking about what does speculative fiction offer that regular fiction or standard fiction has a harder time with is I think with speculative fiction you can hide a lot of really important, poignant, and big ideas that might feel too big to address head on very directly in fiction.
Mhm.
But you can talk about things like war a lot more easily when you think that it's fairies versus vampires, for example.
Mhm.
And you can get connected to those characters and you can have a deeper conversation about what these conflicts are because it feels like it's less, maybe less immediate or less direct. And I think
Mhm.
people are a lot more willing to kind of have those conversations when it's veiled or kind of hidden under something miraculous. And so I think you find these deeper truths a lot in speculative fiction. You find these topics that are maybe really, really hard to address in real life or in person, but having a proxy for it makes it a lot easier and more digestible.
Mhm.
So I think that's what appeals to me a lot about speculative fiction as well, that you can create these really deep, really intricate metaphors and have conversations with readers that they don't even know that they've signed up for.
Yeah. How did you come to writing?
I've always been a writer. I think I knew at 15 that I wanted to be a writer. I love to read. And that was the heyday of, the big book parties had just started to become a thing. And so there would be like midnight release parties and people would get so excited. And there were
Mhm.
there were these books that just everybody read, and it was so exciting to be, a teenager in that phase of life and seeing everyone get excited about something like a book. And I just had this feeling like this is what I meant to do, like whatever that is, like I want to do that. And so I wrote my first novel at 15, and I sent it in a self-addressed stamped envelope to a publisher, and I immediately got, I still have it. I immediately got like a form rejection that had been photocopied so many times. You could see the edge of the photocopied paper. And I kept it. And I think, like we do when we're young, I was like, oh, well, they're lost. I'll just go ahead and write the next thing. It was like, did not faze me. I was still determined that this was going to be my thing. And it was something that I never grew tired of doing. It was when I got into the flow state of writing something, it was so exciting. It was this adrenaline rush for me. It's the best feeling in the world. I think when I'm writing and I'm in that world and I'm creating it and I have full control and I can determine, what's happening. It just feels like this creative nirvana. And it's a thing that I've always loved. It's a thing that I've always taken with me. And it took me many years to get to the point of publishing my debut and many attempts and many failures. And so certainly I would say for anyone out there who's listening who might be a writer, um, a no is not necessarily a no. Sometimes it's a not yet. And you
Mhm.
get to decide what every no means. And I had so many rejections along the way to this path and to getting here. And with each one, you go back and you write more and you workshop things and you talk to other writers and you explore more craft and eventually you get there. But I think you have to be in it for the love of the game first and foremost.
Well, speaking of eventually getting there, what was the road to publication for you? Because now
Yeah,
you're there.
now I'm here. Now I'm here. It's been the most incredible ride. So I had this idea in 2013. At that point, I had written a couple of other manuscripts. I had even sent them out to publishers, and everything had turned out to be a no. They were in the YA space.
Mm,
And I knew that I was ready in my life to work on something in the adult space, and that was what I wanted to focus on. And when I entered my MFA program, I had signed up for a novel writing class. And we got there the first week, and the professor said, okay, so you're going to come next week with a full outline of the novel you're going to write in this class. And I was like, I am. I'm not a person who writes outlines. And so I scrambled and I said, what am I going to write? And I knew that I had my thesis project coming up, which for anyone who's not familiar with the way that these programs work, you usually have to write a 75 to 100 page thesis project that's required for graduation. And it typically is the start of a larger work, or it could be a collection of short stories. And I knew I wanted to leave this program with as close as I could get to a finished manuscript.
mm,
And so here I am in this class. I'm scrambling for an idea. I think this is going to become my thesis. And what kept coming up for me was this idea of this chef and this ghost, this chef and this ghost. And it wouldn't leave me alone. It kept haunting me. And I said, okay, this is the thing. And so I started to work on this outline using all those bits and pieces and scenes that had kind of come to me, the tour guide, the distilled spirits bar, all of it. And so I started to work on this very vague format. And a lot of it changed as I wrote because again, am a writer who kind of just follows my characters and says yes.
mm,
But some of the important things stayed the same of the scaffolding of it. And by the time I finished in that class, COVID-19 had started, which so we were all remote. That was a very special experience. And I worked that into it too because I felt very much like I couldn't visit all of the restaurants I wanted to. And so as much as I could, I put that into the pages, right?
mm,
I visited in my mind and I put as many details as I could because that was the only way I could go to these places during the couple of months that was happening. And in the end, I wound up working on it as my thesis, and they had a series of meetings with agents that were kind of like set up as meet and greets. It wasn't to necessarily sign an agent, it was more to practice pitching yourself to an agent. And I met an absolutely incredible agent there, and I wrote a query letter for Aftertaste for that meeting, just kind of as practice.
mm.
And she said, I love this idea. Can you send it to me when you're done? And I said, yeah, I'm going to try to finish it in a few months. Well, a few months, like to the day, I got an email from her saying, hey, I just finished watching the first season of The Bear and I can't stop thinking about your book. Are you done?" And so we chatted for a few more months and she wound up representing me and she was the biggest and continues to be the biggest champion of this book and is just incredible. Hi, Lucy. You're the best. And with her, we managed to make edits together, kind of fine tune everything, and then we sent it out to foreign scouts first. So the very, very first kind of excitement about this book happened in the UK, which was just
Oh,
wild to
wow.
me. It was such a dream. And then we sent it out in the US, and Simon and Schuster wound up taking it, and it was just the most incredible experience. Um, it was lovely. I love the whole team there. I'm so lucky to get to work with them.
Are you working on a next one already?
I am. Yeah, I am. It is again in the speculative fiction realm because that's what you'll always find from me. It is very different. It's not based in New York City. It's not based on food. Takes place in San Francisco. It starts at the turn of the century, so it's more of a historical fiction focus. And it spans the course, at least right now, this is, anything could change, but it spans the course of 100 years. And it's about a sailor on an enchanted ship and the barmaid that he falls in love with.
Oh, very cool. Do you find that your process is very different now, working on the second novel as opposed to figuring out the debut?
I think that it's a different kind of mindset. I think when you're working on a debut, you have the liberty to work solely on that project, and your
Mhm.
brain doesn't have to think about, language and talking about two different things at once. And I
Mhm.
think now, I'm working on promoting Aftertaste and talking about it and thinking about it. And I'm simultaneously thinking about this other story kind of percolating in the background and what are the pieces of that. And because it's, even the language is different because it's more historically based. So it's kind of like shifting your brain a little bit more. And I think, I've heard that there's pressure for the second book because you want it to do well and you want to sort of satisfy the readers who read your first book and really loved it. And I'm just excited about the story, and so I'm not feeling those jitters yet. I'm in this like honeymoon phase still with getting to work on something new and being excited about it and waiting for that flow to come when I sit down at the laptop.
Do you have a particular routine that you follow every day? Or
I wish I did. I have three small children, so any routine is like kind of a joke. But the routine is basically as soon as everybody is like off to school and settled to sit down, anytime I have time, I'm working. Whether that's, on my phone waiting to pick them up from school or, waiting for the dentist appointment, I'll be typing things in my notes app. And then when I have bigger blocks of time, a lot of times for me that happens late at night when everyone's kind of asleep in the house. So I'll sit down and I'll try to collect everything and kind of do a bigger push that way. But I'm also very fortunate. I have a writing group that I've been working with since we graduated college. We went to school together, and everyone there is absolutely brilliant. There's five of us, and as of this year, all of us will have books out in the world, which is so
wow.
incredible. So that I'm in a really, really lucky place to get to chat with these brilliant writers, and I know that once I have pages to share, they'll be ready and willing and excited to look at them. And they're all amazing. We all write different genres, which is so interesting too.
That's very
Um,
cool.
yeah, so it's been a really, really rewarding, lovely working relationship. So I have that as my kind of more traditional like work team functionality,
Mhm.
even though I'm working independently as a writer.
What do you know now that you wish you had known when you started out with the process of publishing this first book?
What do I wish I knew? I think I intuited this, but I wish someone had told me that it's all going to be okay. That all of the work and the effort is going to pay off. And those moments where it feels hard and you've gotten a string of rejections for various things, that so much of that is has nothing to do with any success that you might find in the future. Like
Mm.
every one of those things is isolated, and it's so personal. It's so hard because when you write fiction, you write parts of yourself into the fiction, not necessarily in an autobiographical way, but like your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions all go on the page kind of necessarily. And so rejections feel more personal than other rejections in other formats of your life. And I think it's important to remember that again, the no's aren't no's forever. And it might also just be like no for this one person or this one publication where it's not a good fit. Um, and so to just keep trying and keep putting things out there. And I think that I wish I had known that there's also a lot of things that being an author you have to do that aren't related to writing that I
Mm.
wish I had known to kind of like mentally prep myself for, like being on social media and kind of promotions and all of that kind of stuff. Like I knew intellectually that was part of it, but I think it's helpful to anyone who's thinking about doing this and going down this path to just know that there are going to be things that you like just administrative things that you have to do for your writing career. And I don't look at any of this as work. It's all just a joy to do. So I'm excited to do it. But I know that I have some friends who are writers who are like, this is not my jam. I don't want to do this. So knowing that that's part of it too is helpful.
Do you have a favorite piece of advice for aspiring authors?
Yeah, I think this is a piece of advice that I heard Kelley Link give, so I'm going to steal it from
Mm.
her. And it's just one of the best things. And it seems so obvious, but it wasn't obvious to me. The piece of advice is make a list of your obsessions. So make a list of the things that whenever you see them out in the world, just a glimmer of it, a hint of it, something in you gets excited. So whether it's like, in my case, food and ghosts and ships and circuses and, magic. So make a list of what those things are for you. Like summer camp is one for me. When you see those things out in the world and they drive something in you and you're looking for what you should be writing about and what you should be talking about, go back and mine your own list, like mine your own obsessions. Because I think a lot of times we're looking for ideas and you're at the blank page and there's nothing more intimidating than starting from zero and you're trying to find your way through it. But I think the answers are in you. You just have to kind of like have a ready, easy way to access them that sometimes you can't, but like having a running list of things like that makes it so helpful and so easy on the big kind of big picture level, also on the scene level.
I love that. I'm going to have to go and make a list of my obsessions right now. But before I do that, we do have a traditional last question on the podcast, which is when Aftertaste is made into a movie or series, what do you think the theme song should be?
Oh, this is a good one. Okay. So aside from the fact that somebody should just write a completely original, beautiful piece for this, the
Of
perfect,
course.
the perfect, perfect song for this, it sounds so silly, but it's not, is Ghost by Justin Bieber. I think that has so many layers to it. And I think it's this song about longing and wanting to be with somebody. It's if I can't be close to you, I'll settle for the ghost of you. I miss you more than life. And I think
Mm.
that is the running thread throughout Aftertaste. It's this desire to reconnect with someone, this ability to have that close connection, that bond where you want to see this person again, but you have to settle for not seeing them unless you go eat at this particular restaurant and decide to have that experience for better or worse. Um, so I think that's what it would be for me.
That's perfect. It is perfect. Daria Lavelle, thank you so much for being here. It has truly been an absolute pleasure getting the chance to talk to you today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.